Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, that was the opening bell on Wall Street as markets are reacting to the criminal investigation into Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The Fed Chair revealed last night that he is the focus of a criminal probe, and right now we're seeing the Dow open down about 300 points. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell is firing back at those allegations. In a rare public statement last night, he says the Fed was served grand jury subpoenas related to the central bank's renovations. But Powell says the investigation's really part of a White House pressure campaign.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation.
President Trump has repeatedly criticized the Fed for not lowering interest rates more and even threatened to fire Powell, but he's denying any involvement in the investigation. The Justice Department tells ABC News, quote, the Attorney General has instructed her U.S. attorneys to prioritize investigating any abuse of taxpayer dollars. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor James Sample for some more on that. Hi, James. So the president and Powell have clashed for months over interest rates. Now you say there's some skepticism about the investigation's viability. What are your legal concerns here?
Well, first, we are at the very early stages. I mean, there's not even a grand jury indictment here. Getting enough evidence to get a grand jury indictment in a normal criminal case is typically something that is not a high bar for federal prosecutors, although we have seen them fall short of that low bar on a number of recent occasions. I think that this is much less about Jerome Powell than it is about the Federal Reserve. I think it is an extraordinary escalation of the political pressure campaign related to interest rates. And I think this is a complicated scenario in the sense that most Americans don't have a real basic understanding of the role of the Federal Reserve and why it is that there is political back and forth. This is exactly why Congress, when it set up the Federal Reserve, set it up with staggered terms to insulate it from political pressure. Presidents always want low interest rates because at least in the short term, they stimulate economic growth and they make the economy look really good. But sometimes low interest rates can have long-term consequences that are bad for the country and the economy. And so there is a tension between short-term interest and long-term interest of the country that applies to interest rates. Jerome Powell, what an unusual statement from him, an unusual step for him to take and to release a video statement. We are in uncharted territory, Diane.
The president already tried to remove another Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook, accusing her of mortgage fraud. The Supreme Court will hear arguments for her case on January 21st. Could that case affect any potential case against Powell?
I don't think it'll affect the criminal investigation against Powell, but it will certainly affect the president's ability and will presumably define what is the president's scope of authority with respect to the only basis for removing a member of the Federal Reserve Board, and that is on the basis of cause, which has historically meant actual malfeasance. And so the arguments in the Lisa Cook case will presumably distinguish the Federal Reserve from other independent agencies. You know, it was just a few weeks ago that the Supreme Court took up the case with the Slaughter case about whether or not the president has the power to remove officers and commissioners from independent agencies. Even the justices who appeared sympathetic to the position of striking down those independent agencies and giving the president greater authority want to differentiate the Federal Reserve for the very reason that the Federal Reserve's independence is paramount for all Americans.
All right, James Sample, thank you.